Imagine, if you will, it is the year 2050. The 1% have taken over. You're either a resource baron or you're a peasant, slaving in the fields. And suddenly, the daughter of a powerful vineyard baron in the Okanagan is mistaken for the Messiah. This is the premise of a new book called An Okanagan Messiah Cometh. It is a sci-fi satire written by author Jack Teng. He used to live in BC. He now lives in Boulder, Colorado, and that's where we reached him this morning. Good morning, Jack.
Good morning.
Now, without giving everything away, what is your book about?
Yeah, so it's basically trying to reimagine a time where all of the world's natural resources are controlled by a few people, so people who are considered resource barons. And so everyone has been reduced to poverty except for this people. So it's a really exaggerated case of the one percenters. And essentially the story goes that a woman who is in this privileged position gets into the situation where she is mistaken to be a messiah, and she's used by revolutionaries to start changing the world and inspiring the people to overthrow the one percenters.
All right. And now, what inspired you to set this book in the Okanagan Valley in the first place?
Well, that's a funny question. I was just driving up and down the Okanagan Valley, up on the Naramata Bench, actually, and I saw a couple of signs that said, wine is not food. And they were protesting a whole bunch of orchards just being pulled out and being replaced by vineyards. And, that kind of got me thinking, and I was just thinking to myself, orchards are really important for food security, and, they're being replaced by grapes, which would be used to make this luxury good. So it's not really helping out food security, and that kind of just raised some questions, and my imagination just kind of ran from there.
Now, what were you doing in the Okanagan in the first place?
Well, that's a funny question, too. I was actually doing research on ticks and studying Lyme disease and studying a number of things related to ticks and people's exposure. And then, so I had a lot of free time and also was slightly traumatized from collecting so many thousands of ticks, so I needed something else to think about.
Now, your book I'm sure people can tell, it's a satire, but there are obviously serious underlying themes. What is the underlying message you're trying to get at here?
Yeah, the main thing I wanted to get at is that there is a lot of issues around our food security and a lot of things that we need to be worried about in terms of our food sovereignty. And I wanted to paint a really grim picture of how things could become. And, there's a lot of cases even right now where we don't even realize how poor the labor conditions are for a lot of workers in the fields in BC, blueberry pickers, for example, even the grape pickers, and a lot of people who endure terrible conditions and to feed us. And I'm just concerned that if we don't recognize these things, then that's something that's going to happen inevitably, just like slipping in without us even noticing.
In your book, the Okanagan becomes a kind of a mecca of wine-driven wealth and exploitation. Do you see, in whatever scale, obviously a smaller scale, but do you feel we're headed in that direction?
I kind of do worry about that. I think that there are signs of that. I think that a lot of Southern American countries where the utilities have been privatized, there are a lot of consumer rights that have been waived, and especially in North America, these things I think that are slowly happening. I think there are a lot of consumer actions that are trying to prevent that, but I do see certain signs and certain fraying of just rights of that are happening these days. And there's another really good book that just came out by Paolo Bacigalupi called The Water Knife, and it's just talking about how water rights have been changing. And it's a huge concern. I think water being something that we use every day, if it gets taken over by corporate interests, we can just very easily see it be rationed, and in another case we might see it just being used only for designer goods. I mean, it's very, very into the future, of course, but it is kind of like something that I think is a legitimate concern.
Why do you think satire is the right medium to explore these themes?
Satire is a funny way to talk about things, and it kind of brings things up in a way that people could become accessible. And, if it's too grim, it's too dark, I think that a lot of people are put off by it. But if you add a little touch of satire, a little humor, I think it becomes accessible and people start laughing about it. Like, for example, in my book, the main character is actually based on my ex-girlfriend, so she's incredibly unpleasant and very, very difficult to get along with. And I put her through a whole bunch of terrible situations. And, I thought that was funny personally, but I think that just, the reader reading about, this one person who's being dragged through these situations and who's very, very uncomfortable, I think that that's a good case where people can laugh at it and then just kind of, bring in the other context as they're reading the book.
Jack, I don't want you to give away the ending, but I do want to know, at the end of the book, is the Okanagan still planted with wine grapes?
Well, it isn't. There are changes that happen, and in fact, the ending of the story actually takes everyone to Vancouver and in fact, right on UBC campus where I graduated, and there's a huge showdown between the haves and the have-nots, and so big changes can potentially happen.
Jack, it's great to talk to you. Thanks very much for this.
Well, thank you.
Jack Tang is an author. He wrote a book called An Okanagan Messiah Cometh. He lived in BC and studied ticks in the Okanagan as part of his doctoral degree. He now lives in Boulder, Colorado.